Marius Borg Høiby, the son of Norway's Crown Princess Mette-Marit, has officially been found guilty of 34 serious criminal charges, including the sexual assault of a woman. The case has sent shockwaves through Norway and raised serious concerns about the reputation of the Norwegian monarchy. Although Marius is not a blood royal and is not in line to inherit the throne, he was raised alongside the future heirs of the Norwegian royal family, including Princess Ingrid Alexandra and her younger brother. His conviction has led many to question what his behavior may reveal about the environment in which he was raised and what implications this scandal could have for the royal family moving forward. According to the court's findings, Marius was found guilty of numerous offenses, including violence, threats, driving violations, and multiple assaults. The severity and number of the charges have left many Norwegians stunned, prompting wider discussions about accountability, privilege, and the future image of the monarchy. The commentator explains that she was present outside the courthouse during the proceedings, witnessing the atmosphere firsthand and observing the large media presence gathered to cover the case. She notes that the outcome is not only damaging for Marius personally, but could also have lasting consequences for public perceptions of Norway's royal family. Before continuing her coverage of the case, the commentator briefly thanks the video's sponsor and then returns to the main topic, explaining that she had been anticipating the court proceedings for some time. Although she did not obtain official press credentials, she joined the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse and followed the developments closely as the verdict unfolded. To better understand the trial, it is important to know how the Norwegian legal system handles cases involving victims. Marius had his own defense lawyers, while the alleged victims were each represented by separate victim advocate attorneys appointed to protect their interests throughout the proceedings. Alongside these lawyers, prosecutors were also present, making for a courtroom filled with legal representatives on all sides. The commentator explains that the broader background of the case stretches back several years. Marius Borg Høiby was born before his mother, Crown Princess Mette-Marit, married Crown Prince Haakon. Although he is not officially a member of the Norwegian royal family or in line to the throne, he was raised within the royal household alongside his younger half-siblings. The investigation that ultimately led to the trial began on August 4, 2024, when police responded to a violent incident at an apartment in Oslo. According to reports presented during the case, Marius allegedly assaulted his girlfriend, caused extensive damage to her apartment, and left a knife embedded in a wall during the incident. The speaker further claims that Marius was already known to police before this event, not because of his royal connections, but due to associations with individuals involved in criminal activity. As investigators examined the case, they reportedly uncovered a broader pattern of alleged violence against women spanning several years. Some of the testimony discussed during the trial allegedly involved incidents that took place within the royal residence itself, raising difficult questions about what family members may have known and whether warning signs were overlooked. According to the commentary, the Norwegian royal family has largely attempted to distance itself from the case by emphasizing that Marius is not an official working royal. However, the speaker argues that there has been a degree of denial surrounding his behavior, pointing to public comments made by family members in his defense. She contends that the allegations were not isolated incidents, but part of a long-term pattern that eventually became impossible to contain privately. In her view, the trial represents the consequences of problems that were not addressed early enough. The commentator also shares her personal experience covering the proceedings outside the courthouse. She describes the arrival of lawyers and reporters as one of the day's most intense moments, with journalists rushing to capture footage and reactions. Watching live updates on Norwegian media while simultaneously seeing participants arrive in person, she was struck by how quickly information was being reported. Although she managed to record video, technical issues with her microphone meant that much of the audio was unusable. Later, one of the victim advocate lawyers spoke to the media and explained that while a conviction was expected, there was always the possibility of an acquittal. The lawyer noted that cases involving sexual assault can be particularly complex because prosecutors must prove not only what happened, but also the intent behind the actions. Nevertheless, the lawyer expressed confidence that the case had been thoroughly examined during the trial and that the court had been presented with a comprehensive picture of the evidence. The commentator continued by describing the intense media attention surrounding the case. Reporters packed both the courthouse and the surrounding area, reflecting the public interest in the proceedings. She admitted feeling nervous and somewhat overwhelmed by the professional media environment, joking that she struggled with imposter syndrome and regretted not seeking press accreditation earlier or asking questions during interviews. Despite those frustrations, she focused on explaining the court's final decision and the significance of the verdict. According to the ruling, Marius was convicted on 34 criminal charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Prosecutors had reportedly sought a sentence of 7 years and 7 months, while the defense argued for a much shorter term because Marius had admitted responsibility for some offenses. The court ultimately settled on a sentence between those two positions. The verdict was delivered early in the morning, and updates began reaching the public almost immediately as journalists followed developments from inside the courtroom. Among the convictions were offenses involving sexual assault, as well as violence against former partners. The court also found him guilty of assaulting his former girlfriend, Nora Hochland, and of violence against another woman whose case reportedly triggered the wider investigation after an incident in August 2024. As part of the ruling, Marius was ordered to have no contact with that woman for 2 years. Several additional convictions related to offenses he had previously acknowledged. Following the verdict, representatives for some of the victims stated that their clients felt relieved by the outcome. Marius did not attend the hearing in person and instead appeared through a video link due to reported health issues. Shortly after the ruling, reports emerged indicating that he intended to appeal the conviction. Despite the appeal plans, the court laid out detailed findings regarding several of the most serious charges. In one case dating back to 2018, judges reviewed video evidence and concluded that the victim was asleep and unable to resist. The court determined that Marius understood her condition and proceeded regardless. The incident reportedly took place in a residence associated with the royal household, adding another layer of controversy to the case. The court also examined another incident involving a woman who had consumed alcohol and sleeping medication. According to the judgment, although consensual activity had initially occurred, the court concluded that later actions took place when the woman was incapable of resisting or giving meaningful consent. Marius denied criminal responsibility in that case and maintained that the encounter was voluntary, but the judges ultimately rejected that argument based on the evidence presented during the trial. The commentator argued that the evidence revealed a troubling pattern of behavior rather than isolated incidents. She emphasized that prosecutors presented multiple cases involving women who were allegedly asleep, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to resist. In her view, the recurring nature of the allegations was one of the most disturbing aspects of the trial and raised broader questions about how warning signs may have been overlooked for years before the case finally came to court. The commentator argues that the convictions demonstrate a long-standing pattern of criminal behavior rather than isolated mistakes or one-time lapses in judgment. In her view, the evidence presented during the trial showed repeated acts of violence and abuse spanning several years, suggesting a deeply entrenched pattern rather than impulsive actions committed in the heat of the moment. She questions whether a 4-year prison sentence will be enough to address such behavior, given the seriousness and duration of the conduct described during the proceedings, that a significant portion of the judgment focused on Marius's relationship with his former girlfriend, Nora Hochland. The court found him guilty of abuse that occurred between the summer of 2022 and the summer of 2023. According to the ruling, extensive evidence was presented, including text messages and other communications that documented violent incidents and threats. The court concluded that Marius had used physical violence against Hochland on multiple occasions, and that she had legitimate reason to fear further abuse. Judges reportedly described a relationship marked by intimidation, emotional distress, and a persistent sense of insecurity for the victim. The court also examined the dynamics of the relationship and acknowledged that jealousy existed on both sides. However, judges emphasized that Marius's reactions were often disproportionate, escalating ordinary relationship conflicts into episodes of aggression. While there may have been arguments and mutual tensions, the court determined that these circumstances did not justify violence. The judgment reportedly noted that even when disagreements became heated, his responses consistently went far beyond what the situation warranted, creating an atmosphere of fear and instability. According to the court's findings, Marius also attempted to control aspects of Hochland's behavior, including her social interactions and personal choices. The judges concluded that this controlling behavior, combined with repeated outbursts of anger and verbal abuse, contributed significantly to the abusive nature of the relationship. Despite suggestions from Marius that Högland may have had financial motives for making accusations, the court stated that it carefully scrutinized her testimony and ultimately found it credible and supported by the evidence presented. The judgment also addressed the case involving the woman from Frogner, whose allegations sparked the broader investigation in 2024. Marius admitted to some of the circumstances surrounding that incident, but the court found him guilty of both violent and sexually abusive behavior toward her. Judges accepted the victim's account of events, including allegations that he assaulted her during the incident that led to his arrest. According to the ruling, the evidence supported the conclusion that the violence occurred substantially as the victim described it. This case ultimately became the catalyst that exposed a wider pattern of alleged misconduct and led investigators to uncover additional offenses that formed the basis of the larger prosecution. The court also found Marius guilty in connection with several offenses involving the Frogner woman, including an additional violent incident and 3 counts of sexually abusive behavior. According to the judgment, some of these charges involved photographs and recordings taken without the victim's consent. The commentator argues that the repeated presence of photos and videos throughout multiple cases suggests a disturbing pattern in which Marius allegedly documented his actions, viewing the recordings as a form of personal trophy. The court further convicted him of violating the woman's peace and breaching restraining order conditions on several occasions. Not every charge resulted in a conviction, however. In one case involving a woman from Lowden, the court concluded that there was insufficient evidence to meet the high legal standard required for a criminal conviction. Judges stated that they did not necessarily doubt the woman's account of events, but found that inconsistencies in testimony and uncertainties surrounding the evidence created reasonable doubt. The court noted that the woman had made notes about the incident shortly afterward, yet certain details remained unclear. Despite acquitting Marius on the most serious allegation in that case, the judges still found him guilty of filming the woman without her consent. Another charge involved an encounter following a party in November 2024. The court accepted that sexual activity had occurred, but focused on whether any of it took place while the woman was asleep or otherwise unable to consent. After reviewing extensive photo and video evidence, the judges concluded that prosecutors had not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the woman was incapable of resisting. The court pointed to factors such as movement, sounds captured in recordings, and the limited length of the videos as reasons for uncertainty. As a result, Marius was acquitted on that specific allegation. Nevertheless, he was again convicted for recording the woman without her knowledge or consent. Reflecting on the overall outcome, the commentator argues that the case reveals a deeply troubling pattern of behavior involving violence, coercion, and repeated violations of personal boundaries. She contends that the convictions demonstrate more than isolated mistakes, and instead point to conduct that allegedly continued over a number of years. While acknowledging that parents cannot be held responsible for every action of an adult child, she questions how such behavior was allowed to continue for so long without more decisive intervention from those around him. The speaker also raises concerns about the role of the royal household in the broader story. She notes that several incidents were alleged to have occurred in or around residences connected to the royal family and argues that this raises uncomfortable questions about oversight, accountability, and awareness. According to her interpretation, the fact that some of the crimes allegedly took place in familiar family surroundings suggests that Marius felt secure enough to act without fear of immediate consequences. Finally, the commentator reflects on the symbolic impact of the scandal for Norway's monarchy. She points out that the future queen, Princess Ingrid Alexandra, is Marius's younger half-sister, and that the controversy has inevitably cast a shadow over the royal family. In her view, the case is no longer just about one individual's criminal conduct, but also about how institutions and families respond when serious warning signs emerge. The scandal has therefore become a broader conversation about responsibility, accountability, and the public image of Norway's royal household. In her final assessment, the commentator argues that despite the court's verdict, members of the royal family appear unwilling to fully accept the reality of Marius's actions. She suggests there has been a long-standing tendency to defend him or minimize concerns about his behavior, and she believes the convictions should serve as a wake-up call for the entire family. While acknowledging that parents cannot control every decision an adult child makes, she questions whether mistakes in Marius's upbringing, combined with years of leniency, may have contributed to the situation. In her view, the family must now honestly confront difficult questions about what went wrong and whether earlier intervention could have prevented the escalation of his behavior. The commentator also focuses on the wider impact of the scandal on the Norwegian monarchy. Because Marius was raised alongside his younger half-siblings within the royal household, she wonders what influence his conduct may have had on them over the years. Although there is little public information about what they may have witnessed, she argues that it is impossible for such a major controversy not to affect the family as a whole. As a result, questions about the monarchy's future, its public image, and the preparedness of the next generation of royals are likely to become increasingly important. Looking ahead, she speculates that the institution faces a challenging road. Public confidence, she argues, may depend on how effectively the remaining members of the royal family respond to the scandal and demonstrate accountability. The commentator believes that this case has intensified existing concerns about judgment and leadership within the royal household and may continue to shape public perceptions for years to come. Returning to Marius himself, she argues that a prison sentence alone is unlikely to resolve the deeper issues highlighted during the trial. In her opinion, he requires extensive rehabilitation, counseling, and psychological treatment in addition to any legal punishment. She points to what she sees as recurring patterns in the evidence, particularly allegations involving recordings and photographs, which she believes indicate behavior that extends beyond substance abuse problems and reflects more serious underlying issues. The commentator also criticizes what she views as years of overprotection. Marius occupied an unusual position within the royal household. He was closely connected to the monarchy and included in many family events and public appearances, yet he was not an official member of the royal family with formal responsibilities. According to her interpretation, this unique status may have created circumstances in which problematic behavior was not challenged firmly enough or addressed as seriously as it should have been. In closing, she expresses uncertainty about the long-term future of the Norwegian monarchy. While she does not predict its collapse, she argues that the institution faces significant questions about credibility, accountability, and public trust. Ultimately, she believes the future will depend heavily on how the younger generation responds to these challenges and whether they can restore confidence in the monarchy after one of the most damaging scandals it has faced in recent years. She concludes by thanking viewers for supporting her coverage of the trial and notes that their support made it possible for her to report directly from Norway throughout the proceedings.